My name is Abe Meisenberg, and I have been a part of Soma for 7 years. I've lived in Tacoma for 15 years, and my wife and I live in the north end of town and have been a part of a few different missional communities there for the past 7 years, and right now we're in the process of transitioning to a new missional community in the south end. And one of the things that I have the privilege of overseeing is our whole shepherding ministry. And so when we think about shepherding, we think about the reality that every person inside of our church and outside of our church has what we call a therapy mindset. And a therapy mindset can be illustrated with a funnel. If you can just picture a funnel where all of the problems or challenges that people are facing are swimming around in the big part of the funnel, and the heavy problems fall to the bottom of the funnel and try to make their way through that little small hole that we call paid professional. And with a therapy mindset, a paid professional is either a professional counselor or a paid pastoral staff person. And there's a few challenges with the therapy mindset. First of all, there's not enough paid professionals to go around, and so there's often a backlog. People can't find good help, they can't afford help, or these paid professionals are very overworked, particularly paid pastoral staff people. That's often the case with kind of their counseling load. Another challenge with the therapy mindset is not every problem gets addressed. With the therapy mindset, only the heavy problems, as it were, kind of fall to the bottom of the funnel and get addressed. But run-of-the-mill problems just kind of bounce around the funnel and really never get any attention. So what we want to try to do is we want to try to flip the funnel upside down so that all the problems, all the challenges that people are facing are swimming around in the biggest part of the funnel, which we're going to say is the community. And the analogy breaks down a little bit because we're going to acknowledge the fact that heavy problems, deeper issues that people are facing, they're going to funnel up now instead of funnel down. And we're going to have sort of different like tiers or different layers of care that we can offer people as needed. So the big challenge in terms of giving good care and really helping people understand the way we're going to approach care as a church family is we're talking about a paradigm shift, because a therapy mindset is a deeply embedded way of understanding that people walk in with. And so there's a number of foundational truths that we talk about, we preach, we try to live in order to really kind of flip that funnel upside down. I only want to talk about one for just a minute, and it's our terminology. We choose to use the term gospel shepherding to describe this whole area of care. Other churches might use the term soul care or pastoral care or biblical counseling. We like the term gospel shepherding for a number of reasons. First of all, shepherding is rooted in a biblical theology. If we flip through the pages of Scripture, we would find that the concept of shepherding is all throughout the whole Bible, that God is the shepherd of his people Israel. And in Ezekiel, we find a prophecy that says that someday a shepherd's going to come and care for God's people Israel. Psalm 23, probably the most well-known psalm, says that the Lord is my shepherd. And then Jesus in John chapter 10 comes and says, I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. And in John 21, when Jesus commissions Peter and asks him 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Each time Peter says, yes, I love you. And Jesus says, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. It's a shepherding commission that Jesus gives to Peter, who was an act and speak first and think later kind of guy. And so Jesus gives him this shepherding commission. And so then we shouldn't be surprised in 1 Peter 5 when Peter, writing to church leaders, says, I, Peter, as a fellow elder, say to you, shepherd the flock. So this concept of shepherding is throughout the whole Bible. Secondly, shepherding is rooted in something concrete versus something abstract. Theologians have debated whether or not we are 2 parts, body and soul, or 3 parts, body, soul, and spirit. So there's even some debate over the nature of the soul and what it exactly is comprised of. So if we could agree on that, then we'd have to try to figure out how to care for that thing, which is very abstract and hard to define. Whereas shepherding, I found that even if people have never had any contact with a real, actual live sheep, if I ask them to describe what a shepherd does, they come pretty close. So shepherding is rooted in something concrete. People can really begin to wrap their brains around what it means to shepherd other people. Another reason we like the terminology is because I think it reinforces the idea that what we're trying to train people to do and the way we're trying to live as a church family is something very normative rather than something highly specialized or technical. If we keep the word counseling and we tell our leaders, hey, we're going to train you in some basics of counseling, I can imagine some of our leaders backing up and saying, oh, I don't know about that. That's pretty technical and specialized. Whereas if we say, we're going to train you how to shepherd people, I imagine them, and I've actually seen it happen, they lean in because it's work they're already doing. And they see it as something normative. They see it as a part of making disciples. So we really like the term shepherding, and that has helped us, I think, begin to flip that funnel upside down, where everybody sees themselves as a shepherd. Everyone sees themselves as someone who is equipped and trained and sent to be involved in the care of other people who are part of the church family. So I want to give one more analogy now to talk about the different kind of layers of care that we have that are a part of our shepherding approach. So I want you to think about a microscope, the microscope you may have used back in high school in biology class, where you could take a slide of like a fly wing and look at it with the naked eye, and then you could put that thing under a microscope, and there were different magnitudes of lenses that you could rotate. You'd have a 10 times magnification, 25 times magnification, 50 times magnification. And so we're gonna imagine a big circle that has concentric circles inside of it, and each one is what we call bringing an increased gospel focus to the person and to the challenge that they're facing. And so the first big outer circle, which is sort of like taking a naked eye glance at a person and the challenge that they're facing, that first big outer circle is, for us, it's being a part of a missional community and being a part of a DNA group. So for us, missional communities are the primary organizing structure of the church. DNA groups are same-sex triads of people who are in the same missional community, ideally, who meet once a week to care for one another. So those, being a part of a missional community, being a part of a DNA group, those two places, those two structures really help begin to offer care to people who are in our community. And so if we have someone who has been a part of our church for 4 months or 4 years, and they do what we call raise the counseling flag, which reveals their therapy mindset because they have a serious problem, and so they think they need to talk to a professional. They say, hey, I'm having marital problems, I'm having financial problems, I'm having problems with an addiction in my life. I need to talk to a pastor, or I need a counseling referral. When they do that, they raise the counseling flag. We respond to them by saying, we believe the gospel addresses every challenge that you're facing. And so the real question is, how can we immerse you in a gospel context and see how the Spirit might bring transformation in your life? So if that happens, when that happens, we'll make sure to be pretty deliberate with how we connect that person to a particular missional community, a missional community that's healthy, where the leaders are aware of some of the challenges that the person might be facing, where they can begin to give care right away and make sure that the person gets right into a DNA group where they can share their story, begin to be known, and hopefully by God's grace begin to find some help and some healing and some transformation for their life. Now, if after being in a missional community and a DNA for a time, we find that we need that increased gospel focus, then the next layer of care is what we call volunteer gospel shepherds. So within the Soma-Tacoma family, we have different little pockets of missional communities around the city that we call city groups. And ideally, we would have 1 or 2 people, maybe a couple, within each city group who could avail themselves to those missional communities to provide a little more specialized shepherding care as needed. Those folks might have a little more experience, a little more gifting, a little more training, and that would potentially equip them to be able to come alongside a missional community leader, DNA partners, and a hurting person to provide some shepherding care. Now, what we don't do when we get to that second layer, that volunteer gospel shepherd layer, is we don't ask the person who is in need to go off and meet with that volunteer gospel shepherd alone. Rather, we ask the volunteer gospel shepherd to come into the context. We want that person to meet with the hurting person, the DNA partners, and hopefully the missional community leader as well. And after having done this for 4 or 5 years, I can tell you those meetings happen all the time where there's 4, 5, or 6, or 8 people in the room. And we're trying to care for a couple or for an individual, and there's a number of people around who are caring for that person. They're invested in their life. A couple of reasons that we do it that way. One, we want to make sure that if that volunteer gospel shepherd is able to sort of unearth something new out of that hurting person's heart, that the people who are giving primary care to that person are there to see that happen. So they know how to continue to care for that person on an ongoing basis. But secondly, we want those DNA partners and those missional community leaders to continue to be equipped in their ability to shepherd and care for others. And what a better way to do that than being in a real-time, actual shepherding context with a person who has a little more gifting, a little more experience in the room, in action. So if after meeting with a volunteer gospel shepherd a few times, we find that an increased gospel focus is needed, then the next layer of care is what we call redemption groups. Redemption groups are sort of like a group counseling, group shepherding experience. It's a 10-week process. It involves reading a book called Redemption by Mike Wilkerson, who developed redemption groups. And it involves a preaching component. We teach through the book of Exodus, we teach through the Exodus narrative, which is all a prefiguring of the work of Jesus on the cross. So every week we're connecting the Exodus story to the story of Jesus and his life, death, and resurrection. And then there's the group component as well. And the groups usually have 5 or 6 participants and 2 or 3 leaders. So there's a lot of leadership in the room. And each participant and leader begins this 10-week process by sharing their story. So we get some issues out on the table right away. And then through the reading and through the preaching and through listening to the Spirit, asking lots of questions, trying to draw people out, speaking the truth in love, we have seen that redemption group process be a very vital and valuable tool for helping bring transformation into the lives of people. Now, at the end of the redemption group process, we do something that helps ensure that what happens in redemption group doesn't stay in redemption group. We want it to spill out and affect this whole shepherding ethos within our whole church family. So one of the things that we do is we have the redemption group participant meet with one of their redemption group leaders and their DNA partners, and maybe even their missional community leader, just to kind of close the loop of communication and care and say, hey, here's everything that happened in the last 10 weeks. Now, hopefully that redemption group participant has been sharing those things with their missional community leader, with their DNA partners along the way, so none of it's new news. But we put that little step in place just to ensure that everything that we're doing is within the context of the missional community and DNA partners caring for this person. So if after redemption group we find that the person needs an increased gospel focus, we go to our next layer of care, which is meeting with a shepherding elder. Here in Tacoma right now, that would be me. And if I get directly involved as an elder, I'm going to be meeting with the person who is facing, difficulty, facing a challenge in their life. I'm going to meet with their missional community leader and ideally their DNA partners as well. And I think there's a few possible outcomes of my involvement. The first possible outcome is that by God's grace, he would use me to sort of unearth something new, that we would discover something or talk about something or get new insight on something. The Spirit would somehow break through and something that hadn't happened yet would happen, and we would be able to bring the person, by God's grace, another step closer to health in their life. That's possible. Another possibility is that this could be a church discipline situation, and that the person, after all this time and energy and effort, is actually just choosing to walk in sin and disobedience, in which case I would want to be directly involved with helping figure out what the right steps would be for us to take with that person given their particular situation. And then a third possibility with my involvement is that together we determine that the person needs to be referred to a professional counselor, which we do on a regular basis. We affirm the role and the importance of professional Christian counselors in our city, and we're happy to refer people as needed. So we think it's a great step that some people need to take. We just don't want it to be the only step that everyone should take. So if we get to that step, then we're happy to give referrals to people. And what we do to help ensure that even that step stays within all these circles that we've just described is we encourage that person to take other people with them to their counseling meetings. We've talked with counselors here in town, and they're thrilled to hear that we would actually encourage people to do that. One counselor told me, we tell every person who ever comes into our office, don't come alone, and no one ever listens to us. So to know that there would be a local church that was referring people to us and encouraging them to do that very thing was very encouraging for him. So we have seen over the last 4 or 5 years a number of amazing things happen with our gospel shepherding ministry, our approach to shepherding within the Soma-Tacoma family. We have seen lives transformed. We have seen marriages grow in health. We have seen people grow in financial freedom. We've seen them delivered from addictions. We've seen interpersonal relationships, and where there was fracture and there was division, we've seen unity, we've seen reconciliation. But to me, the most exciting thing that we have seen happen is many, many, many leaders, many ordinary, everyday people stepping up and bearing the shepherding load in a local church. And they do it with gladness, and they do it with joy. And so a lot of my time over the last 4 or 5 years, rather than being in one-on-one meetings, has been either in meetings with 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 people in the room, or on the phone with leaders who are asking for help. They need consultation. They're calling to say, hey, here's how it's going. Here's what we're talking about. Can you coach me through this a little bit? And I always end those phone calls with such joy and thankfulness to God that he, by his Spirit, has revealed a lot of these things to us and through his word, and that we have been able to equip people to do the real work of ministry in the lives of people. So that's what we are trying to do as far as shepherding here at Soma-Tacoma.